the 30th anniversary celebration of Sing Praise of King. Speaker, the 40th Mayor of the City of Newark, New Jersey. Put your hands together for Mayor Raz J. Baraka. Come on, Newark. I can't hear you. Come on, just a little bit more for the Honorable Mayor, Raz J. Baraka.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Still got to praise. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I still have a praise inside of me, Reverend Benny. I'm not going to sing it tonight, though. I was feeling it the last time I was singing that. You know, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me. I just want to thank first Gwen Moulton and the entire team that continues to put together these celebrations for Dr. King. And I am more than humbled and honored to be here in my city celebrating as the guest speaker for one of the greatest, not just African-American icons and leaders, but one of the greatest American icons and leaders. That's important for us to understand. As we study American history, literature, and academia, if there's not a deep study of Dr. King, his beliefs, and his development, then on its face, you are about to be told a lie. I'm humbled to give this speech as the mayor of one of America's oldest and greatest cities. And in any problem that America has, we've lived it twice here in Newark. But the great thing about this city, the city of my birth, the first mayor that was actually born in the city for decades, is that we have a history of pushing back, of defining for ourselves and being at the forefront of national struggle. And today we have an opportunity now to try to prepare ourselves and the next generation of leaders to move this country into a place where not just social democracy, but economic democracy shelters every human being, regardless of race, gender, religious beliefs, or sexual preference. We have a chance now to define what a state of emergency looks like for our communities, to add some historical and political context to our struggle, and not just be angry at our conditions without any real pathway out, but enough to tell people, and not enough just to tell people that the building is on fire. We have to be like King said and become the firemen. More importantly, we have to learn what it will take to build a new house, a more equitable and fair house with a sound foundation built like a tree next to the water. We have been in a state of emergency since the end of the Civil War. We've been waiting for someone else to call of a state of emergency for us, and then we respond. When there are weather conditions, there is a state of emergency, but the wind has been beating our naked backs for centuries, and we've been left out in the cold for decades. They call a state of emergency now that opioids have affected and debilitated their families and communities, but we have been living with the heroin and prescription drug overdose in our communities as a cheap medicine for the pain of poverty and hopelessness for years. There was a state of emergency called when those young boys in Baltimore began throwing stones at officers and looting stores, but not one person called a state of emergency over the consistent death count that haunts every street in American cities where young men are murdered, some running in traffic stops, others in front of recreation centers as young as 9 and 10 years old, and sometimes at our own hands. They argue gun control while our lives become precarious and even meaningless. There is no state of emergency called to deal with the violence of unemployment that has plagued our communities for decades. No state of emergency called because of intractable poverty that affects our children's lives, almost 40% in this town, or the growing wealth gap or income inequality. We have been in a state of emergency, and our lives have been governed by this emergency since we got here. But the good thing is that not all of us have grown comfortable with this state and have been and are working tirelessly to get these boots off our necks. Martin Luther King, despite what they tell you in school, was one of those people. Martin Luther King was a true Christian. It's easy for people to say that they follow Christianity, but being a true Christian takes a revolution of values. It's difficult to be a Christian in a place that glorifies violence until you get the upper hand. Difficult to be a Christian in a place that organizes itself around the success of the individual over the deprivation of the many. It's difficult to be a Christian in a place where being poor is normal and starvation is given to us as a daily wage. It's difficult to be a Christian in a place where they are committed to incarcerating us more than they are educating us. It is difficult to be a Christian in a nation that has normalized white supremacy and made it okay to celebrate the flags of those that have lynched us. Dr. King was a Christian in a place where it was okay to believe in God, but difficult to do good or God's work. Dr. King was a Christian where they used the symbol of ultimate sacrifice to invite terror and raise hell to burn crosses on our lawns. Dr. King was an optimist, not an opportunist. Dr. King was an optimist, not an opportunist. Opportunists will go with a half-truth that puts them at the front than the whole truth that tells them to wait his turn. Opportunists will partner with a lie that benefits his self-interest and invest in what's real that lifts us all up. Opportunists takes advantage of our dissatisfaction for their own personal gain rather than work to create solutions. I'm telling you, an opportunist eats the king's meat and watches us starve, then say, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. An opportunist will distract us from our focus, veer us off the right road, guide us down the wrong path, pull us off the wall to feed their own ego. They are not interested in bearing their own cross. They just want to benefit off the one you carry. Dr. King was no opportunist, and we have our fair share of opportunists today. Dr. King was an optimist. He believed that victory belonged to the righteous. And no matter how difficult the terrain or enormous the odds, he believed that a small man with a slingshot and the promise of God could defeat a valley of giants. He knew that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego escaped the fiery furnace without a scar. And they stood against oppression and told the king that they believed in God and that he would save them. But even if he didn't, they believed in him anyway. King was an optimist because Jonah was freed from the belly of the whale. He was an optimist because he was taught the story of Nehemiah on the wall, because he knew of Daniel's defiance and his refusal to eat the king's meat. He was an optimist because he heard somewhere that the blessed are the meek and that they will inherit the earth. He was an optimist because he knew of a people, the only people that didn't come here looking for freedom or fleeing persecution. The only people that didn't come here looking for the promise. In fact, it was us that made everybody else's promise come true. Yeah, Dr. King was an optimist because he saw us stare in the face, the ugly face of racism and genocide, being tortured and murdered and isolated in poverty and despair. But we're still here. We're still fighting. We're still breathing. We're still pushing. Still alive. Still making America live up to its promise. Still making her live up to the things they wrote on paper. Still declaring our humanity, our truth in a sea of ignorance and hatred. And like Reverend Bingham said, we still got a praise inside of us. Dr. King was an optimist, and it's difficult to be optimistic in a sea of hatred. Dr. King began to find out the hard way that the same people that marched against the murder of Emmett Till in the South will refuse to stand against the murder of Freddie Gray in Philadelphia. Those that sat with him to desegregate lunch counters in Mississippi refused to stand with him against poverty in Cabrini Green projects in Chicago or Felix Fuld in Newark. He would see that even today, those that fight that we live in low-income housing won't march with us to get rid of our low incomes. Those that shout that we have affordable rent won't fight that we own what we create. King wanted democracy. That is, that we should have what every other American was promised. In fact, we were still owed for 250 years of free labor in cotton fields and sugarcane fields from South Carolina to South America. That whatever they had, they owed us. Don't be ashamed. Whatever they have, they owe us. If they gave us welfare, they owe us welfare. If they give us farm subsidy, they owe us farm subsidy. If they give us a grant, they owe us a grant. They give us housing, they owe us housing. We worked from sun up to sundown with no pay for 250 years. They put us off their plantations with no money, no job, no formal education. We could barely read and write. We had to build our own schools and teach our own babies. We barely knew where we were at all. He believed that we deserved the right to vote and the right to liberty and freedom at all costs. He believed that we were American, and if they didn't want us to be American, then they shouldn't have kidnapped us and brought us to America. Dr. King believed in self-determination, that we have the right to see and define the world in our own image, our own terms based on our own experiences. We have the right to love ourselves, to build for ourselves and to lead ourselves. We have the right to make our own mistakes and write the endings to our own stories. That the Emancipation Proclamation could only free your body, but it couldn't free your mind. Dr. King was right when he said we must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved with until we have a radical redistribution of political and economic power. He was right when he said that we read one day we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty and the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. King was right when he said that the promises of the Great Society have been shut down on the battlefields of Vietnam. And I would say today that those promises have been met with tax breaks for the super wealthy and billions of dollars for a senseless wall, making the poor, the black, and the brown bear the heaviest burdens of poverty and inequality. And while they are debating to spend billions on this wall and finding ways to subvert their riches from the public domain, we are struggling to build schools, to fix our roads, to find decent employment with a living wage, adequate housing. We have to choose between our health or work, or medicine and food, or rent and clothes for our children. We need a radical change in our values. Dr. King was right when he said it did not cost the nation one penny to integrate lunch counters. It did not cost the nation one penny to guarantee us the right to vote, but now we are dealing with issues that will cost the nation to spend billions of dollars and undergo a radical redistribution of economic power. He was right when he said it is a crime for people to live in the richest nation and receive starvation wages. Dr. King was also right when he discovered that this country was willing to undergird their poor white brothers and sisters and give them grants and education, and later subsidize their housing and suburban growth, built roads that led out of our cities but did not release the jobs when they left. They drew circles around our communities and refused to invest in them. They built high-rises and concentrated us in poverty with no real means for growth or development. They purposefully deteriorated our tax base and funded our schools through property taxes, then blamed us when we didn't have the resources to allow our children to compete with theirs. Dr. King was right when he said we needed a guaranteed income. And Dr. King was murdered at 39 because he was right. Paul Robeson said, "We ask for nothing that is not right, and herein lies the power of our demand." We don't want special privileges. We just want to be treated like human beings. We want our children to go to good schools that teach them the truth and not burden them with self-hatred and lies. We want them to graduate from college like everybody else's children. We don't want them shot at traffic lights or buckled to their seats. We don't want them choked to death for selling cigarettes. We don't want them murdered in front of recreation centers. We want to live in safe neighborhoods. We want jobs that pay decent wages, and we want to live in housing that's not falling apart. We deserve to go on vacation like every other American and afford to go to the doctor when we get sick. We don't want any special privileges. We just want medicine and health care that's affordable and keeps us alive and not addicted. We want to see ourselves in the world, a part of the human family. We want justice. We want equality and equity. We don't want any damn handouts. We want everything that was taken from us and owed to us to be given to us, and we want it now. We don't want to be poor. We don't want to be in jail. We want to represent ourselves. We want to speak for ourselves. We want our lives to matter too. Not over anybody else's life, but our lives should matter just as well. In fact, our lives is as old and as deep as time itself. Before there's a Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before Columbus was financed by imperialists and got lost, we was here first. When God blew breath in the first human beings, we were here. Our existence had its origins in God's imagination itself. The rest of the world is here because we were here. Our legacy matters. We taught the world science and math and geography. They came and sat at our feet to learn. Our legacy matters. All of this talk about American greatness, about America being great again. America was an economic power because we were slaves. It was an economic power because we built their ships and laid foundation for their halls of power. Our mothers raised their children at the expense of their own. America is only exceptional because we struggled here, because we bled here, because we marched here, because we were lynched here, because Dr. King made it more democratic, more inclusive, more humane, more right, but we have a long, long, long way to go. Somebody should inform the President of the United States when he talks about Africa that the whole world is from Africa. That if he calls Africans names, he's talking about his own mama. That the oldest bones on the planet were found at the foot of the Nile in the Old Divide Gorge. That if you look at any geneticist, any scientist, they trace the mitochondria DNA all the way to the continent of Africa. I don't care if your hair is straight or curly or knotty, if your nose is broad or slim, if your lips are thick or skinny, you came from Africa. And if civilization started in Africa, and if you agree that God created civilization, then you agree to talk about Africa as to talk about God himself. Our lives are more inextricably tied, as King would say, than they have ever been. I would say we all in the same boat now, but we always been in the same boat. It just was us chained to the bottom. Just 2 years from now, demographers are saying that the majority of our population under the age of 18 be classified as people of color or mixed race. America's economy will always remain stagnant until they equalize pay for women and pay for people of color. It will always remain stagnant until they introduce millions of us into the labor pool, until it invests in these cities. American economy will always remain stagnant as long as wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few. As long as the top 25 hedge fund managers as late as 2015 made $13 billion, more than the entire economy of Namibia, Bahamas, or Nicaragua, or more than every teacher in the county of Essex put together, or all of American kindergarten teachers combined. America will always be stagnant and far from great, Mr. Trump, until it pulls itself out of the cistern of inequality, until it stops enriching itself off the bitter nectar of white supremacy. Dr. King knew that. He also knew, more important than anything else, that we had to do it together. We can't get ahead off each other's back. We have to have each other's backs in order to get ahead. We can't put each other down in order to lift ourselves up. We have to be down with each other so we can all get up. We can't destroy each other in order to grow. Our growth depends on our collective life. We are living in a perilous and dangerous time, but I'm not worried. Like Dr. King, I too am an optimist. I know my enemies come in different shades and colors and backgrounds. I know that most of them are not here today, but some are in this hall today. Some of them live right amongst us, misguided by confused self-interest, greed, and the desire to be the drum major. But what they ask, I cannot give. Others driven to hatred by our commitment to justice and equality. They're plotting as we speak to throw me in the well, as they did Jeremiah, into a pit like Joseph. They're acting like Sanballat, creating mischief to get me off this wall. But I'm an optimist like Dr. King, because I know how these stories end. And even if they try to isolate us on an island, as long as we keep our faith and focus, our eyes on the prize, victory is ours. They may encamp armies against us or plot to devour our flesh, but their weapons will surely fail, and they will trip and fall. We are not afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrows that fly in the day, because he shall surely deliver us from the snare of the fowler. There is no well too deep, no problem too complex, no lie too vicious, no enemy too big. We are optimists because what we ask is right, what we want is just, because we are on the right side of history, and we know the best way to honor King is to stand up and say, stay woke, but more importantly, stay informed and stay active. I am not afraid. He is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? I've already been to the promised land. I've already seen pain and poverty and hardship. I've already been where you're trying to put me. They've already made me sink deep in the mud. But I'm going to tie one dirty, filthy rag to another dirty, filthy rag, 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 and lower it down in the well, deep in the mud, and pull myself and my people out of the mud of poverty, out of the mud of hatred, out of the mud of unemployment, out of the mud of self-hatred, out of the mud of hopelessness. Like Dr. King, we will continue to march, we will continue to fight, and we will let no one turn us around. God bless you.